trying to make y'all comfortable. For the record, you ain't trying to grow, then it's done for you.
Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of this 3-part series on interpreting organic acids test, SIBO tests and also comprehensive stool test. Yesterday I did the organic acids test, so be sure to have a watch of that one if you missed it. So today I'm going to be looking at how you interpret SIBO tests, so let's jump into a previous test result of mine and interpret what it means. Now SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and it's probably the one condition more than any others that will cause a vegan to move to a carnivore diet. It can be unbearable and cause horrendous symptoms if not treated. Now also just to reiterate here that up to 84% of those with IBS have SIBO as the underlying cause. So if you have IBS or IBS type symptoms, then it's really important that you test for SIBO. Now SIBO was what I was convinced that vegetable police had in conjunction with histamine intolerance and also potentially oxalate and salicylate issues. Now I think it would have been incredibly useful for the whole of the vegan community if he had have taken the test, because we could have demonstrated that he had an underlying gut issue that were causing his health problems and not the foods per se. We could have shown to large audiences that if you are dealing with these type of gut issues, how you inevitably reverse these problems and get your health back on track, but it wasn't to be. Now SIBO is essentially where you have bacteria in the small intestines where it shouldn't be. The small intestines is where you're supposed to digest your food. So when you eat fibre-rich foods and carbohydrates, the bacteria ferment the food in the small intestines and cause all manner of symptoms from IBS, brain fog, vertigo, depression, anxiety and skin issues to name a few. You can also then develop nutritional deficiencies around B12, iron and also ferritin. Now when you constantly inflict injury on the gut lining as a result of SIBO, it allows undigested food particles straight into the bloodstream, which are likely to trigger food allergies and sensitivities. And if you do have SIBO, then it should also be noted that these bacteria also have the potential to cross the gut barrier and cause immune issues, as well as putting a large stress on the liver and causing fatigue type issues in the body. And with higher amounts of bacteria in the small intestines, the bacteria will produce a lot of acid byproducts that can cause neurological and cognition issues. All in all, if you do have SIBO, I can guarantee it will make your life a living nightmare. So how do you test for it? Well, the gold standard of testing is the lactulose breath test. Now obviously this creates a conundrum for vegans in that lactulose is derived from galactose, a sugar derived from cow's milk. Now here you have to make a personal choice and call. You can even take the lactulose breath test, get a positive test result and then fix the underlying issue, or you could opt for a glucose breath test which is vegan, which has a high chance of giving you a negative results when in fact you do have SIBO. Now I will get into this in more detail later in the video, but here I just want to give you my opinion on taking the lactulose breath test as a vegan. Now for me, I place a very high level of importance on avoiding any exploitation of animals, and equally I place a high level of importance on my own health. Now given the severity of the health problems that SIBO can cause if left untreated and undiagnosed, reluctantly I would always recommend the lactulose breath test for vegans, but this is something that you personally will have to make a call on. Now I will explain why the glucose tests are really not as effective at detecting SIBO later in the video, but I just wanted to raise these concerns for now. Now most breath tests are based on the ability of intestinal microbes to ferment carbohydrates, producing hydrogen or methane in the process. Now a fraction of these gases naturally diffuses from the bowel to the circulation and is excreted with expired air, so essentially you breathe it out. Now because there is no other metabolic production of hydrogen and methane, the breathing out of these gases may be used as a measure of bacterial fermentation during the passage through the gastrointestinal tract. So here on this graph, which depicts a test result of mine from a while ago, the vertical axis states that trace gas values in parts per million. Now this means the amount of gas produced by fermentation in parts per million. The horizontal axis shows the sample time in minutes. This is the time that your breath samples were taken. Now the control is the breath sample that you give before you drink any of the lactulose or glucose solutions. This gives us a baseline reading. So to get a truly positive result, your reading has to go up by 20 parts per million from the baseline at around 80 to 90 minutes. and there should be 2 peaks, one at this point here and one later in time showing fermentation in the small and then the large intestines. A negative result would just show 1 peak after around 100 minutes, although I will discuss some of the problems with this later in the video. Now, the criteria set by the NHS and many health organisations around the world to recognise SIBO is around 20 parts per million peak from your baseline at around 80 to 90 minutes. So the Quintron guidelines, so the manufacturer of this particular SIBO test, have the following guidelines. So they say there has to be a rise over baseline in hydrogen production of 20 parts per million or greater within 120 minutes after ingesting either the lactulose or glucose. Or there has to be a rise over baseline in methane production of 12 parts per million or greater within 120 minutes after ingesting either the glucose or lactulose. Or there has to be a combined rise over baseline in the sum of hydrogen and methane production of 15 parts per million or greater within 120 minutes after the glucose and lactulose has been taken. Now, world-leading SIBO expert Dr. Alison Siebecker has a slightly different take on the test results, and she suggests that there has to be a rise in hydrogen production of around 20 parts per million or more within the first 2 hours after the baseline. Or there has to be a rise in methane production of 12 parts per million or more at any point in the 3-hour test, including the baseline. And she also suggests that a positive result can be a rise in methane production of 3 to 11 parts per million at any point in the 3-hour test with constipation, including the baseline. Now, Alison Siebecker also suggests that there is a common pattern of methane production which starts high and stays high with little fluctuation. And Alison Siebecker also suggests that a positive test results can be a rise in hydrogen and methane with a combined production of 15 parts per million or more within the first 2 hours after the baseline reading. Now, just to confuse matters, there is a third type of SIBO called hydrogen sulfide. But for these, people will typically need to take a urine test to confirm the actual levels of hydrogen sulfide in their body. Now, a positive test result that is dominated by methane is often associated with constipation types of IBS. And a positive test result with a rise that is dominated by hydrogen is most likely to be associated with diarrhea types of IBS. Also, in some cases, there may not be any peak at all, but the results can still show some form of fermentation. For example, some reports show high levels of fermentation at the beginning of the test results, even before a solution of either glucose or lactulose is taken. And a rise of gas production at the control may also indicate that the exclusion diet was not followed correctly before doing the test, or the fasting was not carried out correctly. And it may also indicate there is fermentation occurring even after fasting, and this could also be seen as a positive test result. So if there is still a peak later on related to the large intestines, it could be surmised that there is fermentation in the small intestines. However, this wouldn't be seen as a truly positive result in line with the diagnostic criteria. Also, in some cases, there is fermentation across the whole of the test results with no peaks, and this is generally considered to be from the large intestines. And finally, if there is a 0 at baseline and then a rise before 80 to 90 minutes, then this can indicate a bacterial presence in the stomach and should be ruled out, although this is rarely picked up on these type of test results and it is not designed for this use. Now, I know that was a lot to take in a single video like this, but the biggest takeaway from this video is that if you do have IBS, bloating and cramping, food intolerances, anxiety and depression, or even skin problems, then you simply have to go and get the test. It's fairly cheap at around £100 or so compared to the organic acids test and stool testing, which are considerably more, so it's well worth the investment to get to the root cause of your health problems. Now, I haven't covered off any treatment options in this video because these will form future case studies on my channel over the next 6 months or so. But in simple terms, there is dietary modifications such as the SCD diet or the vegan form of it, the use of antibiotics and herbal antibiotics, and also some other gut boosting strategies. And also, just to let you know, SIBO can be fairly difficult to treat if you have a severe case of it, and you may need a couple of rounds of treatment to eradicate the infection. And also, before the meatheads jump in and say, well, if you just go carnivore and get rid of the carbs, then the bacteria will simply die off. And these type of statements just indicate the stupidity of these carnivore dieters and a lack of understanding on their part. So depending on the type of SIBO that you have, the bacteria are still able to ferment even in the absence of carbs, which is why Vegetable Police still can't touch carbs now, because he has not fixed his underlying gut issues. So while he is currently managing his symptoms through diet, the bacteria is still present there, it's just kind of laying dormant. Anyhow, I hope you all enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you have any specific SIBO questions, then let me know in the comments below. And tune in tomorrow for part 3 of this series, which will be looking at stool testing. And as always, keep the questions coming. If you have a question for me, then hashtag AskGojiMan in the comments below, or send your video questions through to contact@GojiManNutrition.com. And as always, remember to look after your body, because it's the only place you have to live. And I'll see you next time.
For the record, I'm done trying to make y'all comfortable. For the record, you ain't trying to grow.